Time for a bit of an interesting footnote in Star Fox history. Hello everyone and welcome to Let's Play Star Fox 2. It is a Super Nintendo game, but by and large you're probably not going to be playing this on a Super Nintendo, for reasons we'll get into as we go through the LP. Just to show off though, on the record screen we are starting on a completely fresh save file, and there is a reason I'm showcasing that, because I am getting everything in this game by and large. Let's not mess around, let's head into the starting difficulty normal mode. I have returned. I shall make the Cornerians suffer. Inhabitants of Cornera, you shall fear my vengeance. I will demonstrate my awesome power on all of Lylat. That dialogue moves fast. Star Fox team, do you read me? I have terrible news. Our sworn enemy, the Fiend Andross, is alive. Even as we speak, he's launching an assault on Corneria. The battle carriers and attack forces of Andross are now advancing on Corneria. Enemy bases have been established on overrun planets. Planetary missiles will be fired from these enemy bases. Once again, we must ask you for your assistance, Star Fox. Corneria will survive if it sustains minor damage, but if the damage reaches 100%, it is all over. Engage the forces of Andross, while at the same time keeping damage to Corneria at the lowest level possible. Good luck! You know, just easy things. But in a pretty unique move for the series, barring I think this and Command, where there's a couple times between those two games, you actually have control over any of these 6 characters whenever you want. Fox is not even required to play the game. With that said, there are stat combos here. Fox and Falco are balanced, Slippy and Peppy are defensive, and Miu and Faye, the 2 new characters, are very speed-based. On the early difficulties, it doesn't matter too much who you choose, but for higher difficulties, I do recommend just sticking with both Fox and Falco and doubling up on that for a reason we'll get into shortly. And the game begins. Select a destination by moving the cursor and then press B. To engage the enemy, land on planets and intercept ships. Switch positions with your wingman by pressing select. Return to your mothership to warp to any free planet. Doing such will also restore both of your characters to max health, because since you can swap to your wingman at any time, you essentially have 2 health bars, which is the shield number down there. So, whereas Star Fox 1, 64, and most of the others are very linear stage-to-stage progression things, the stage progression in 2 is quite a bit different. For one thing, on at least the first 2 difficulties, which planets are attacked are random. But this is by and large a real-time strategy game where there's just Star Fox stages when you're actively fighting combatants. Cruisers, missiles, individual squadrons of ships are always going to be flying at Corneria, and you need to intercept them while also taking care of anything else in your way, namely the planets that are attacked. But something you need to keep in mind, there is an actual time limit. Time is actively passing whenever you're actively moving in the game, and managing that while also making sure to do your objectives is the biggest challenge on all 3 difficulties, especially if you're trying to get things done fast for high score stuff. That number at the top right is always going to be ticking up, and each of the 3 difficulties have their own time limit you need to keep in mind. I think it's about 100 for normal mode, which is pretty safe on the whole. And also new to Star Fox 2, at least in terms of how they force it on you, there's an actual first-person perspective whenever you're in space stages to help you try to navigate yourself, orient yourself a bit better. By and large, though, the game controls, for the most part, the same as Star Fox 1. You got your boost, your brake, you gotta keep in mind flight controls and all that. But the new thing on the whole is that anywhere there's a floor, you can now press select and your R-Wing will transform into its walker mode, which would later be brought back not only as the Landmaster technically in Star Fox 64, but this form itself will be brought back in Star Fox Zero on the Wii U. This here is a peppercoin. Those are the collectibles for the game on the large. There are 52 of them scattered across the 3 difficulties of the game, and we're going to be getting them all because it's the closest thing this game has to a true ending, quote-unquote. This was a cruiser stage on the whole, by the way. You can get into the cruiser pretty quickly by just holding the boost button. You'll not have to worry about any of the enemies along the way. And usually on the insides, it's a very linear path with a couple of hazards that ends in one of these core boss fights that don't really do much to attack you. Star Fox 2 can be a hard game, but a lot of its difficulty is derived from managing the time and tasks around you more so than the individual stages and boss fights. There's only really a couple fights in the game that should give you a lot of trouble. I'm ignoring it for right now, but if you have a case like this where there's not much on screen but there's a missile heading for Corneria, go for it immediately if you can, unless you're low on time. Huh, Leon of the Starwolf Wing is now here. Before you access any of the planets on most of the difficulties, you'll have to fight a member of Starwolf in what's originally their first appearance, for reasons that we'll get into in a few moments. When it comes to these fights on lower difficulties, a couple charge shots is all you're going to need to worry about. They're not very good about deflecting or dodging, but if they fire at you, because they can use their charge beam, double tap either the shoulder buttons to do a barrel roll, which, like 64 Beyond, can deflect projectiles aimed at you. So, the missiles. The missiles you want to go after not only because they do the most damage to Corneria, but also because they have a good chance of giving you some decent power-ups. By and large, power-ups in the game, there's a couple placed in the stages by default, but they're largely random what is dropped by either missiles or enemies. So if you want the lovely twin blasters that we know and love throughout the rest of the series, you're just gonna have to hope you find them somewhere. Missiles can also drop things like extra lives, extra sub-weapons, or just health outright, so make sure you take care of them ASAP. Speaking of items, that's why I chose Fox here, and why I recommend you choose Fox and Falco on the whole in the game. There are 3 main sub-weapons in the game. Smart bombs, which are an instant screen nuke within a certain radius at least. There is a shield that shields you up, pretty safe and simple. And then there's the heart, which I believe is a heal? The 3 sets of characters each come with a set sub-weapon, and Fox and Falco always start with 2 smart bombs, which is why I recommend that combo. Because if you're trying to get from one destination to another very quickly, but you need to take care of a missile or an enemy brigade, it's really good for reducing the threat. Also helpful there is the satellite cannon. That charges up as time progresses, and after it's fully charged, on its rotation, the next time it intersects something sight-wise, it'll just destroy it instantly. It can be a missile, it can be an enemy brigade, but it can't be a member of Starwolf in the case they're for some reason flying away from a planet. It can't be certain mini-bosses, and they can't target the cruisers. So the main stages in Star Fox 2 take, by and large, the same pattern. You start in a large square area that you need to do some sort of objective in, usually either destroying something or stepping on certain switches, at which point you'll open up the main enemy base, and we can go in there to take care of the core within there. And doing this ASAP can have its benefits. Namely, the missiles in any of the difficulties are fired out by bases on these planets, and by destroying the core of the base here, you prevent more missiles from spawning from this planet. In fact, you can even head to a planet early, destroy the missile that's there, I think, and completely reset its missile timer. Because you can leave stages at any point in time you want to if you just press start and then choose that option. Normal mode is sort of a gimme, but you also don't have access to a lot of the game. Because there are, what, 6 total planets that you can do stuff at throughout the game. Normal mode, you only have stages that can happen on 4 of them. The stages that get chosen every playthrough are, by and large, random until expert mode. There's the peppercoin for this stage, or I guess this part of the stage. On average, most planets have at least 1 in some form, like every battlecruiser has at least 1. Planets tend to have 2, usually 1 in the overworld section, and then 1 somewhere in the base. For the most part, finding them is just looking around certain corners or noticing where it might just kind of pop out behind walls because of how limited 3D worked on the Super Nintendo with draw distances and all that. It's some of the ones on the surface that can be a little tricky to find because they require doing certain things, like stepping on certain items, killing certain enemies that you might not know to, or just looking outside the barriers of the level. The cores in the bases actively do a better job of attacking you because they send some rinkas at you, essentially. But if you just circle strafe around them while mashing the fire button, frankly, most boss fights in this game aren't going to be much of a problem for you. With that said, in the case you're thinking that, taking care of things if I do it in a certain order is going to be easy, and this won't be too hard of a playthrough no matter what, even on normal mode, the game is prepared to throw some curveballs at you. Depending on your actions. It appears a puny pet rat is running about. How cute. Go play with your pet. Just play nice. No matter what uncertain difficulties, on every difficulty actually, past a certain amount of things you've done, like destroying all the cruisers or things like that, Andross can just send a mini-boss after you, like the Mirage Dragon here from the intro. The Mirage Dragon can be a little tricky because, for one thing, you can only actively damage it, I think, at the tip of its tail or in its mouth. But its mouth is also where all of its attacks come from, including that giant laser that is essentially just a constant hitbox, so if you're anywhere near that, it can be kind of tricky to avoid. It can also just breathe fireballs at you that track. If you're having trouble navigating the game in 3D space, though, in the space levels, there's two things you can do. For one thing, the top right of the game is a map constantly, and you can always see enemies on the radar, and you can even tell where they are related to you altitude-wise by looking at that, because the closer to the same altitude as you an enemy is on the radar, the more close, not only to the size of your icon they are, but also they get hollow if they're on the exact same altitude. I'm Pigma of the Star Wolf Wing. Behold my talent! If you've never played this game before, you might be looking at a lot of the things this game has and going, wait a sec, that's from 64. There's a good reason for that. While the copyright date on the title screen says 96, this game was originally going to be released in 95. Argonaut and Nintendo co-developed the game overall, and they were going to use an even better version of the Super FX chip for this. But the game was cancelled by, I believe, Miyamoto directly due to the release of the N64 coming up and wanting to prioritize development on that. On top of that, apparently, internally, they were looking at the improved Super FX chip, and it would have made the cartridges too expensive, not only to produce on large scale, but also probably for people to care about buying it at that point in the Super Nintendo's life cycle. So the game, which was already like 90 to 90% of the way through development, was essentially canceled, but they did, by and large, finish development on it and keep stuff around with it. So when the Super Nintendo Mini released back in 2017, they finally officially released it. They even gave it some extra little polish here and there, to my knowledge, finishing some things that weren't finished in the released betas that people found over the years. And it's just an interesting little note of history of what could have been if the Super Nintendo had been around for an extra year or two instead of them shifting focus to the 64. This was also, by and large, the last game released by the developer because they went defunct in, like, 04, 05, somewhere in that range. Supposedly, the first Croc game was supposed to be a Yoshi game at some point in development, but I think that was them bringing that to Nintendo more so than them working directly on it to start. And here I am taking advantage of something you should use with your mothership on Corneria at any point in time. If the planets you want to get to for stages are too far away, or there's missiles in weird locations, head to your mothership and use them to warp to any unoccupied planet. It is absurdly useful for getting to destinations quickly because it takes no time, barring the time it takes to get to the mothership itself. Because in some cases that is less time, traversal-wise. So this is what I was talking about a little bit earlier. When it comes to the battle cruiser stages like this, yeah, there's some hazards in your way and some enemies trying to hit you on the way in, but you can just hold the Y button to boost all the way to it. And usually you're not going to get hit when you do that, and that helps you with the timer anyway. So, especially if you're replaying a difficulty for finding pepper coins or things like that, doing score attack, you using the boost button is a pretty good idea at most times. I'm taking my time mostly to grab pepper coins like that one that are hidden around corners. On top of the fact, there are some rooms in this game where the doors are locked, and in those cases you're going to need to do something to unlock them, like find a switch, kill certain enemies, things like that. As for my own history with the game, it's by and large the same as a lot of other people's. I remember playing one of the beta ROMs that leaked on the internet sometime between like 2013 and 16, and I thought it was neat, but I think the coolest thing about the game on the whole, we'll get into this as we go, not so much on normal mode, but on the higher difficulties, this is arguably the most ambitious Super Nintendo game with what they were trying to do on the hardware. For better or worse in that case, because there's some times where, well, you probably already noticed, the game runs well in some situations, arguably because they have more space stages, better than the original Star Fox, particularly in some of the dogfights. But this game runs at like 10 to 15 frames a second at most times. Star Fox, you mangy cur, how dare you challenge me again? Well, then stop trying to invade Corneria! So the reason you want to go after cruisers is that they spawn enemy brigades like this that will constantly head towards Corneria, albeit not as directly as missiles will. If I were to say there's a priority structure for what you should take out in any of the game's difficulties, it is missiles, enemies, mini-bosses, cruisers, and then the stages. Because if you can reduce the stress on your time limit by taking care of all the minor enemy brigades that are flying towards Corneria, and then take out the cruisers to prevent them from spawning, you can then focus on the planets that are generating the missiles. Finding a good order of operations and learning to multitask with what is happening around you and adapting to what gets spawned on the screen is a very key task in this game. Especially on higher difficulties where there's more and more random events that can happen. Like, I want to say this actually can't happen on normal mode, you just need to take too long for it to happen. Andros can just command all planets to launch their missiles at once, which is complicated to deal with. I think he can command the ships to do a very particular thing we'll see down the line. There's a lot of on your toes thinking in this game on the whole. Thankfully, once you get towards the end of a difficulty, and the screen starts clearing out, you'll have to worry a lot less. On normal mode, Eladard here is a case of one of the objectives I brought up earlier, where there's going to be barriers we need to shoot around the entrance before we can actively access the base. Of course, I need to get on the crawler anyway and look for the pepper coins up here. I would recommend taking this game at a slightly different pace than the way I'm doing it for this LP. I'd say play through difficulty first, grab a pepper coins you notice along the way, and then after you've been once, go back for the others. Because when you grab a pepper coin, like this one that was being held by that bird, which you do need to jump in the case it gets too high up in the air, they're collected permanently. I think even if you get a game over, they're still collected. A shield generator's here somewhere. Destroy it, Ribbit. What I am doing is technically, I guess in some regards, a challenge run, where I'm trying to get everything done as quickly as possible, which is a way to play the game, but I would recommend taking your time more on higher difficulties as we get through it, because rushing through can be a bit of a problem, especially if you're ignoring, say, missiles charging at Corneria, or other hazards happening that can damage Corneria on the whole. Especially if you're taking a lot of damage yourself trying to fight the time limit. Usually, you have more than enough time as long as you prioritize things in a certain order. I get a little stupid throughout this LP. Admittedly, partially my fault, because again, I rushed through and it's just the timer weighing down on me, but also, I haven't played this game nearly as many times as any other Star Fox game, barring Command. I think this is only my maybe third complete playthrough of the game. Maybe. I don't know, like second, third, or fourth. I want to say 3, though. So my experience isn't as high on top of the game's technical issues, showing their head every here and there. Also, in this room is one of the most annoying types of pepper coins in the game. Sometimes when you're looking for pepper coins, you need to notice the level design around you versus what it shows on the map on the top right. Because in that room there was a corner that you could just walk through to get to a pepper coin. Which seems annoying, but at least there's that hint. Keeping an eye on everything in this game is the best advice I can give you. Oh, also, another thing they added to this game that I don't think was in the original from memory. This is the first game that allows you to actually charge the R-Wings blaster to get charge shots in, which is the best way to do damage to most boss fights. But with that, I'm gonna need to end this off here. Thank you guys for watching, and in part 2, we're gonna go finish off normal mode. See you guys then.